Okay, welcome. I am Janice Bellucci. I'm Executive Director of the Alliance for Constitutional Sex Offense Laws. I'm also a little tired on and I'm an attorney. So I'm a civil rights attorney. I know very little about criminal defense, and I don't want to know any more than I already know. So don't ask me criminal defense questions, please. But one of the areas that crosses my plate, which you'd say maybe this is criminal defense, but I see it as a civil issue because when I sue, I'm suing in civil courts, okay? And it's the area of residency restrictions. So let's go to the next slide here. Oh, you can't see anyway. And the question is, what are residency restrictions? Because there's a little bit of there can be some confusion about that. Okay, so what I mean when I use the term residency restrictions is any limitation about where somebody who's on the registry can live. And oh, by the way, when a registrant is limited in where he or she can live, their families are limited as well, right? And we have some terrible situations, including registrants who are minors, so they're less than 18 years old, they cannot live with their family. Okay. We also have dads who can't live with their wives and children, and we have all kinds of other terrible situations that you can think of. So that's what we're talking about today. Then it's like, well, what kind of residency restrictions? And they can be a statewide restriction, or it can be a very local restriction. So local restrictions can be an ordinance that was adopted by a city, or it could be a law adopted by a county. Okay, so three levels of government here. Thank God there are no national residency restrictions, okay? So we don't have to worry about that, but we're talking about statewide, we're talking about county and city. Most of them that we've been worried about are city ordinances. We have a state law here in the state of California. And how many people here are from California, if I can ask? Looks like just about everybody is from the state of California. Okay, so then I can talk a lot more about our state. And by the way, Anoki is here to talk about New York and what's going on in New York, which is even, it's just one variety of terrible. There's no other way to put it. Okay, so in addition to the fact that they can be at these different levels of government, the fact is this huge question about, are residency restrictions limited to people while they're on parole? That is a very strong legal argument we've been making, and I'm going to fill you in on some details in some recent cases where we've had both a state court judge agree with us and a federal court judge. These are both at the lowest level, so we're talking about Superior Court for state, and we're talking about U.S. District Court for federal. So there's two higher levels above both of those. Neither of those cases has been appealed. And the question is, will they be appealed, or would in another case they might be appealed? But so far, no appeals. So that means that they stick. The types of restrictions that we have either geographic or density restrictions. So the geographic restrictions are probably more like what you're used to hearing about, and that is you can't live X number of feet away from, and then fill in the blank, a school, a park, a child care center, the library, blah, 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 whatever these people can think of, that's a geographic restriction. The density restriction is how many registered citizens can live in a certain, like, apartment complex. So not a single apartment, but an apartment complex. And we had plenty of restrictions out there that basically say that only one registered citizen can live in an entire apartment complex. And especially here in Los Angeles, there's some huge apartment complexes, right? There may be 1,000 people or 1,000 apartments in a complex, and yet they're saying only one registered citizen can live in the entire complex. So as you can imagine, that's a very limiting factor. We've challenged both of them so much. Okay, then you go, residency restrictions, and what's the big deal? Well, right now, housing markets are pretty tight. It's hard to find an apartment. It's hard to find a house to rent, right? And so there's a lot of competition going on for these apartments as well. But let's just talk about, you find a place, and you either do know or you don't know that you're prohibited from the city ordinance from living there, and you move in anyway. And then what could happen to you? Well, some of these city ordinances, there's a fine involved, and it could be up to $1,000 a day. For every day you live in that place you're not supposed to live, you could be fined up to $1,000 a day, and you could be put in jail for up to 6 months. okay? And so, talk about a double whammy. What if you got fined and put in jail, right? Then you can't afford an apartment anyway, I guess. You can say, oh well, but then what happens to your stuff? What happens to your family, more importantly? And so these are really serious, it's really serious business when you violate a residency restriction. Also, if we're on parole or probation, the fact that you violate even a city ordinance could basically result in a violation of parole or probation. And that's not good either, because then you could be sent back to the slammer. We don't want that to happen. And in a state like New York, it could actually prevent you from being released from prison for a very long time. So residency restrictions are a big deal. Oh darn, I wish you could see this. Okay, here we go. There's been some recent court decisions in California that have really helped me fight residency restrictions. I have filed 31 lawsuits so far against cities that have residency restrictions. And by the way, prior to filing these lawsuits, I sent the letters to the cities. It's like, dear city, you've screwed up. You passed this ordinance, which is unconstitutional. Let me tell you about these recent cases, and you might change what you got on the books. Oh, by the way, if you don't change what's on the books, you could be sued. Okay? And a few cities listened to that and went, okay, we give up, and a couple counties, and they repealed. That's our aim, by the way, is to get them totally repealed. We don't want anything on the books at all. Because one of the things, too, is if there's residency restrictions on the books, it really has a chilling effect, right? And I have a couple of cities, and you'll see on this list that say, we're not enforcing. And I'm actually forcing the issue of lack of enforcement to see if we can get a successful decision. So I've got 2 cases right now. I filed 31. I've got 2 cases going to trial. One of them involves a city here in Los Angeles County, the city of Maywood. The other one is the city of Ontario, which I believe is in San Bernardino County. Okay? So what we're trying to, the thing I'm trying to push here was the city of Ontario that says, but we're not enforcing it. It's like, really? Then why is it on the books? And they can't come up with a reason, right? So I believe that it has a chilling effect, and so anybody who reads or the law or calls me and asks me, I go, look folks, it's on the books. They can, you're gonna make a big investment like buy a house in the city of Ontario and then later be told you can't live there? I mean, that's a really big decision for a family to make, right? So why would you move to Ontario if there was even the threat of enforcement? And when there are other cities nearby, right, like Rancho Cucamonga, some people like to live there despite the name, in Rancho Cucamonga, there are no residency restrictions. So if you have X number of dollars to put down payment on a house, okay, then you're going to go to Rancho Cucamonga and you're not going to go out to Ontario. That seems like a plan that the city of Ontario might have come up with. Okay, so let's go back to the state Supreme Court decision of Taylor, Taylor. In 2015, we're talking about more than 3 years ago, it was March of 2015, our state Supreme Court said that the blanket enforcement of residency restrictions, quote, hampered efforts to monitor, supervisors, and rehabilitate registrants, right, in the interest of public safety. Okay, it's like, really? So you care about that. You want to rehabilitate registrants. Interesting. Okay, but this is a really precious language and bears no rational relationship to advancing the state's legitimate goal of protecting children. Okay, so Lori Jo, when you talk about framing and stuff, I go, okay, we can agree that the state has a legitimate goal of protecting children. We agree with that, okay? And then you got residency restrictions. And guess what? They don't actually do that, right? They don't help protect children. In fact, and I'll read some more things, you'll find out some other courts and our state sex offender management board says it actually hurts children. It decreases public safety. Okay, so that's the Taylor case. And that case, by the way, involved San Diego County, and it was registrants on parole. And there were 4 men, and it was terrible circumstances. And one man, he ended up living in a riverbed, right, in a tent. I can only imagine this plastic tent that he lived in, a pup tent, okay? And we had another man who had HIV and he was addicted to cocaine, right? And there was a treatment center that would have taken him in, but for the fact that the cop said, oh no, this treatment center is too close to a park or a school or both. And this was in San Diego County. So they kicked him out, and he was homeless. All 4 of these registrants, by the time the case was filed, were homeless. They had nowhere to live. And yet, this was supposed to be advancing the state's legitimate goal of protecting children. Wrong. And thank God the court said wrong. And they said, again, the thing about blanket enforcement of residency restrictions. So it leaves open the question, is there some other kind of enforcement of residency restrictions that might be good? Or at least valid and constitutional. Well, when this decision first came out 3 years ago, there were headlines in all kinds of newspapers that said, oh my God, residency restrictions are gone, sex offenders can live anywhere they are, beware, public, they're going to be your next door neighbors before you know. By the way, if I had my choice, I'd live next door to a registered citizen. So even if I weren't doing the work that I'm doing, if you look at the statistics, the very few registered citizens who repeat their behavior do not do it next door, okay? They go far away. If they're going to repeat their behavior, they go far away. So anyway, back to the Taylor decision, the fact that there's no rational relationship, huge. We lawyers, we love that language. Let's talk about the next case, People versus Lynch, in the very next year, 2016. So this is a question about whether or not residency restrictions can be applied against registrants who are not on parole. Now, why would that issue even come up? Okay, a little background here. The state legislature refused to pass a state law, residency restrictions law. The state legislature said no. They could figure out this was ridiculous. It wasn't going to increase public safety, so they said, we're not doing this. So what did it take? It took 2 members of the legislature, married to each other, Sharon and George Runner, one in the Assembly, one in the Senate, who got money from some wealthy person, they must have scared the stuffing out of him, and said, okay, we're going to have a ballot initiative. That's how Jessica's law came into being. Jessica's law was you can't live within 2,000 feet of a school or park throughout the entire state of California, right? But when they wrote it, whoever wrote it didn't, I think, fully understand what they were doing. Because they said what we're going to do is we're going to amend a certain part of the California Penal Code. That part of the California Penal Code only applies to people on parole, okay? Not to everybody, just to people on parole. And for a while there, the courts were ignoring that part, right? In the early cases. What? Who? What? No, we don't, they were ignoring that part, and we're like, look folks, when you talk about statutory construction, I know we go on. The fact is that it says right here, the part of the penal code section that's being amended has to do with people on parole, registrants on parole. Okay, so here comes People versus Lynch, and that was the argument that was made, that applying residence restrictions to people not on parole would conflict with the purpose of registration. It would restrict access, registrants' access to housing opportunity. It would disrupt the rehabilitation process. We've heard that word twice now, rehabilitation, right? For the broader group of men and women on probation. Instead, it should focus on treatment and rehabilitation. Okay? You mean there's a judge out there who cares? There's a judge who wants people on the registry to be rehabilitated, and it's not going to happen from the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, by the way, but at least there's a judge, a state judge who cares. And that wasn't our state Supreme Court, that's the middle level, so the Court of Appeals, right here, okay? So that's People versus Lynch. And again, the judge in that case said, basically, it can only be applied to people on parole. So why in the heck have we filed 31 lawsuits? Because they still don't get it, or they just don't have the political backbone, say the cities, basically, to get rid of these. So we have another case called Doe versus City of Lynn, and that was a 2015 case, and actually that was not in California, but Massachusetts, but it cited the Taylor decision, right? So we have a California Supreme Court decision that is being cited in the state of Massachusetts. And what it says is, as a supervised and stable home has been recognized as a factor that minimizes the sex offender's risk of reoffense. Wow, that's what everybody says they're afraid of, right? All these monsters on this list are going to go out there and do some dastardly deed again. That's supposedly what That's why there's a registry, so you can monitor these folks over here on the registry. And this court in Massachusetts says no, and says that people on the registry basically deserve a stable home. And nobody has a stable home if they're homeless. Okay, and then it says also that the disruption that comes about because of residence restrictions is inconsistent with the legislature's goal of protecting the public. Okay, so again, you have this public policy reason that the legislature bases new legislation on, right? And it gets passed by the legislators, and it's supposed to advance a certain goal, but they're saying it doesn't do that. Interesting. Okay, that's Massachusetts. Let's get back to California, though, and we have our Sex Offender Management Board. And by the way, these folks are supposed to be the policy wonks on sex offense policy in the state of California. I say supposed to be, because some of them are not too bright. But anyway, and there's a law that created them by the legislature, and it says this agency's going to be on there, that agency's going to be on there. We've got a lot of government people on this board, a lot of them. And the people, the victims advocacy group represented on here, we are supposed to have somebody representing public defenders or at least a criminal defense attorney. That position's been vacant for some time. We keep trying to get it filled, no. We would volunteer readily to be a member of the Sex Offender Management Board. Oh, I was told, no thank you. But we can try. Despite all of these limitations, our Sex Offender Management Board has actually come up with some good ideas and some great data that we use, okay? So when we go to the state legislature, we're saying, remember that board that you created, and these are your policy wonks? Well, this is what your policy wonks are recommending. And in this case, they're recognizing here about residency restrictions. And what they're saying, this is their conclusion in a formal report. They said, based on all that's known about sex offender recidivism and the nature of most sex offenses involving children, there is no evidence whatsoever that residency restrictions are related to preventing or deterring sex crimes against children. No evidence. Wow. I love to cite that. And I do in all of my lawsuits. Okay? It's like, look what our state policy wonks have to say about residency restrictions. No evidence. Okay? And then the next sentence is at least as good, if not better. To the contrary, the evidence strongly suggests that residency restrictions are likely to have the unintended effect of increasing the likelihood of sexual reoffense. So again, back to Lori Jo and the framing, and you go, look, if we agree with you and we want to protect the children, and we find out that this doesn't protect children, but oh, by the way, it makes a lot of people homeless, and we understand stable housing is important, then what the hell are they doing as part of our laws? And when we get courts to agree with us, it is so true. So, and Jill Levinson, anybody in this room heard about Jill Levinson? She's a PhD, is a sociologist,
I think so.
Okay, oh yeah, journal social work. Okay, so Jill Levinson, great resource. She put out a report in 2016, it's called Hidden Challenges. Sex offenders legislated into homelessness, okay? And what she says is, they contradict decades of research, so these are all the brainiacs, academics getting together, of research demonstrating that when criminal offenders return to communities, they are much more likely to reintegrate successfully, right? When they have meaningful employment, stable housing, right, and the support of law-abiding family and peers. And when you are homeless, you are living in a riverbed. In California, you're living under the freeway bridge. In Florida, right, you don't have stable housing and you do not have the support of your family and peers. Just the opposite. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, so these are like, it depends if you like guns or you like bows and arrows. I kind of like bows and arrows. So I'm going to talk about arrows. I see these as arrows in my quiver, okay? So when I put together a lawsuit, these are arrows I'm going to pull out of my quiver, and I'm going to aim at that target. The target is to repeal the laws, okay? And so the great thing is we do this in these cities, most of them, their knees start knocking. Oh my God, especially if we file it in federal court. I remember the very first residency restrictions case, we filed it in federal court because I'd rather go to federal court, quite frankly, right? And this is a civil rights issue. So I filed it in federal court. The city attorney wasn't even admitted to any federal court. So he had to scramble and figure out how to get admitted to the federal court so that he could defend the lawsuit. I mean, they could have hired an outside law firm or something, but maybe the city's cheap, I don't know. But anyway, he went to the process and he became a member of the federal court. And then he realized he had no idea what he was doing, and he convinced the city council within 30 days to repeal and to pay us attorney's fees and costs. So that was a really nice result. And by the way, the very first city was the city of Grover Beach. And the reason that's important is that's where Frank Lindsay lived. Okay, so Frank Lindsay, and Frank and I had both gone to his city council meeting when they actually expanded the residency restriction. In the beginning, they had a 1,000 foot restriction, and then they decided, oh, there are too many places in the city where a registrant might be able to live, so they expanded to 2,000 feet. We went to the city council meeting, said this is unconstitutional, not to mention stupid and counterproductive, and they said, who cares? We're doing it anyway. And they did, unanimously. So they were the first ones. Always,
Did you win?
Yes, ma'am. It took 30 days, and they totally repealed and paid us the money. So, by the way, the two claims are the reasons to sue. We usually use our preemption, which is that these city ordinances are preempted by state law. Remember, we had this Jessica's law on the books. It's still there, by the way. We've limited it now to only people on parole, we believe. Though we could be appealed, right? These decisions that we have, we're waiting. It's like tick, tick, tick. When does it become final? And so we're waiting on that. And the other is the 14th Amendment. So we're saying also there's a lack of due process here, and you can't do this. You can't say that nobody can live here. And by the way, earlier when Catherine Carpenter was speaking, she talked about banishment. Okay, so we say this does constitute banishment. When in the whole city, there's like this little sliver over here and one little sliver down here where a registrant can live, it basically is banishment. You're basically telling people on the registry you do not want them to live there. And we've had some cities fight with us about this, and the thing is, we take that and then you put the zoning laws on top of that, the local zoning laws, and then you can find out sometimes it's 99% of the city's off limits. That's banishment. I don't care what they call it, I call it banishment. And another thing is, because we use civil rights laws to challenge these, we don't get damages for our plaintiffs. I know at the other meeting, the plenary session, I was asking people to join us as plaintiffs, and folks, when you are the plaintiff, you're doing it from the goodness of your heart. You're not going to get paid anything, okay? Because otherwise, it puts us in a different realm, and it's just too hard. So we're going for basically attorney's fees and costs. And what we do with the money that we recover, which is a small amount of money, I assure you, the fact is we put it right back in the pot, okay? And that we can sue the next city. And that's how we've gotten to 31 cities. Yes, ma'am?
Can I ask you a quick question? So I live in the Bay Area, and I think this city I live in is probably still has a law in the books. It's not enforced.
What city is that?
Palo Alto. So my brother lives in Indiana, and he's a registrant.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to leave him my house, and he wanted to come and live in it, could I be a plaintiff?
Well, I don't think Palo Alto has residency restrictions. There's a handout here that I'll give you all before we end. And one side is the 31 cities we've sued and what's happened in those 31 cities. The other side is the ones that remain. And Palo Alto's not on the list. But it's a good question. So let's just say, if in one of these cities where there are residency restrictions, and somebody leaves you a house, what can you do about that? Well, you can own the house, but you can't live there. Yeah, and folks, this breaks up families sometimes. I had a situation with one of my clients who owned a house. I mean, he owned the house, and his wife and his son lived in the house. And they were telling him he couldn't live in the house. But what he could do was he could drive his car down to the end of the block, park at the end of the block and sleep in his car. Now, why does that make the community safer? That he is sleeping in his car. And in the summer he was hot, and in the winter he was cold. this went on for 2 years, and I didn't even know it when he called me. So what do? We sued the city, and right away he was able to move back with his family. Okay. I had another city. Get this: this man was convicted in another state. He got an interstate compact, which are hard to get. Okay, and he has health problems, significant health problems, and he's basically destitute, right? And his sister, his loving sister, said, "I will take you in. You can live with me, and I will also care for your medical needs," right? And our state government said, "Okay, this is our Department of Corrections." They said, "Okay, we will accept him," because basically somebody's willing to support him when he comes in the state of California. So he goes to the city of Murrieta. I'm going to name them here. He goes to the city of Murrieta, and then he goes in to register in the city of Murrieta, and they said, "You can't live here. We have residency restrictions." And he's like, "Well, wait a minute. What do you mean I can't live here, right?" And again, a man that has life-threatening health medical problems, and a sister who's willing to basically give him medical care and housing. And we fought it. It took us 1.5 years against the city of Murrieta. But we fought it, we won. And with this, and we did file that in federal court. In fact, we got a temporary restraining order that prevented the city from making him move from his sister's house. And this is how ridiculous it can be.
I'm just curious about that. Why would the interstate compact have ever been approved for him to move somewhere that had restrictions? That doesn't make
Well, remember what the two claims we have is preemption? So here a city was trying to say we're more powerful than the state government. And CDCR in that case, I rarely have nice things to say about CDCR, but I did that day. And they said, "We don't care about your city restrictions, it's okay with us." And so that's what eventually won the day. Okay, but they were really slow learners. So it took 1.5 years of litigation to get to the point where he could live. Do you want to go ahead and you can pass it around. Oh, yeah, good. Here. Okay. So when we started these 31 lawsuits, in the beginning they fell really quickly, dominoes that fall quickly, and that was like awesome. It's gotten harder. Okay, and it's like, why is it getting harder? The laws haven't changed. If anything, the cases are in our favor. Why is it? Well, what we're finding out, and I've actually had a couple of cities tell me that, in fact, they couldn't do it unless they were sued. Okay, so the city council members are so afraid that they will not get reelected if they're perceived as being friends to registrants, right? So instead, what they do is they wait till they get sued. And I find it's an invitation. So of the 2 trials that I have coming up this summer, one of them, the city of Maywood, they sent us a letter. After we sent them a letter saying, "You got a problem here," they sent back a letter and say, "We don't care. You want us to change something? You get a judge to order us to change it." So that was an open invitation to sue them. And let's see, Maywood is our 24th case number 24.
They're the ones that just had a big corruption thing with their mayor and everything. A lot of them went to jail. That was, they were taking all the money from the people in there.
The city of Maywood has quite a few problems, and you think with that many problems, and my understanding is they're down to 11 employees, you think that they won't try to settle the case, but they're not so smart. So instead they decided to fight, and we're going to go to trial on July 25th unless they get smarter. Yes, sir.
question. I trust you with what this list is, but I happen to 100% know that my city has a 2,000 because I had to move.
And what city?
It's called Tehachapi. I just happen to know that because I had to move to out of the city limits. They're not enforcing it though.
Okay, so what this gentleman just said was that the city where he lived says they're not enforcing it, and yet they forced him to.
But they still made me move into the county limits.
Okay, so that's enforcing it.
Right.
Please don't leave this conference without telling me more. Okay, so that sounds like our next lawsuit. I'm serious. If you're willing to be a plaintiff. Okay, great. Okay, otherwise Franklin's just going to have to want to move to Tehachapi.
That's important almost.
Yes, I'm sorry I came in late and I'm getting up to speed on this.
Okay.
Is it the theory that in California state level it is illegal for these communities to have their restrictions and then they're doing it anyway and then so you're able to just go and point it out to the courts and say no?
It's not that simple, okay? So there's different parts to Jessica's law. First there's Jessica's law, there's subsections A, B, and C. We've had to fight every one of them, Okay, so it basically said, thou shalt not live within 2,000 feet of a park or school, state law. Then that got pared back, I believe, to only those on parole. But subsection B said, local government, so that's cities and counties, you can kind of do your own thing. We say 2,000 feet, you can choose some other amount of limitation, geographic limitation. So some of them did. Some of them are 500 feet. The
But
largest
for people on parole.
well, but that's not, I mean, Jessica's law again was poorly written, and all they did is they took the law and they codified it, clump, into the penal code. And so the penal code section said, local governments, you can pass your own residency restrictions. But what they didn't say was, in that particular point in time, they can't ever, a state government can't say you can violate the Constitution, right?
Right.
And yet, that's what they've done, they're violating the Constitution. So, and the preemption comes in, that's the thing about parolees or non-parolees. So we had to convince two courts, one federal court and one state court, that because this says, because part of the penal code that it's in is for only people on parole, that it only applies to parolees. Okay, so that's what we're waiting to see whether or not somebody's going to appeal it, but right now we have those two decisions on our side. Okay, and the federal decision came first, by the way. We have a decent judge in LA County in the U.S. District Court of the Central District, and who used to be a criminal defense attorney. That helps. Okay. So this handout that was just given to you, it is two-sided. The 31 are the 31 lawsuits here. On the other side, we thought was a complete list of all the cities and counties that have residency restrictions. I've just been told maybe Tehachapi needs to be added here, so we will certainly look into that next week and see what happened in Tehachapi. Yes, sir.
Now, the cities on that side of the sheet, is that if you're looking at paints as in those cities? All right.
Yep. Yeah, and I think you live near Lompoc, which has one. And I want to tell you though, this is kind of like the cats and dogs here. These are the ones that we think we aren't as strong a case as the other ones we've already sued. So let me give you an example. The one that involves the city of Lompoc, I believe they only have a 500-foot restriction. And that's bad, but it's not as bad as some others, like a 3,000-foot restriction, right? And what we do, we actually have a mapping expert who maps these for us and does all these concentric circles and stuff like that, and then we see what areas can somebody possibly live in. And remember, then what we do is we put a zoning map on top of that and go, oh, but it's zoned for agriculture. Well, you can't live there if it's zoned for agriculture. Or in Ontario, it's the airport. You can't live at the airport. You know, so there's some things like that. So, and then other things like, you know, Fresno County, it has a 3,000-foot restriction, and we haven't mapped it yet, but Fresno County is pretty rural, right? And remember, these are places that are outside of the cities in Fresno County. This is just the county properties and stuff. And so, remember back to Taylor, and they said, oh, 97% of the properties in San Diego County were off limits to people who are required to register. And if this says, well, it's 50%, it's not a strong case. I'm not saying we're not going to do it, but when you have your priorities, you take the easiest ones first. Yeah. But I will say that every time I see library, this red blinking light for me. And when we went after presence restrictions to get rid of the places, you know, the prohibitions, you can't visit here, there, and all these other places, every time it said library, they were one of the first cities to be sued. Because there is something called the right of access to information. And we took that, actually the city of Albuquerque had a restriction that said you couldn't visit the public library. If you were on the registry, you could never go to the public library. And ACLU took that case and they won it, right? And so I cited that one a lot when we're doing presence restrictions cases. And by the way, in the state of California, there are no presence restrictions that are at the local level, and there's only one state law, and that state law says if you're on parole, you basically have to ask for permission from your parole officer before you go to a public park. Okay?
Or beach or anything.
No, just park.
And that only covers parolees, not those on probation, right?
Correct. However, if you're on parole or probation and you have conditions of parole or probation, you do have to comply with those. Okay, so we're mostly talking about people beyond parole or probation. So, are there any questions about California? Because, yes.
Yeah, just one question. On the sheet here, it says Los Angeles County state not to be enforced. What's the significance of that?
Okay, maybe you weren't in the room earlier, but it bears repeating anyway. We haven't fought the argument yet, but we're about to fight it with the City of Ontario. The City of Ontario says that they're not enforcing the ordinance, but it's on the books. And so LA County is saying the same thing. But remember, it's only people that live in county property. So if you're actually inside of an incorporated city, that doesn't apply.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah,
I know it's kind of confusing. In LA County, most of us think of it as being very urban and not rural, but there's some little rural parts of LA County around. There's some, like there's other places, there's some really large places that are
Now, what about national parks and stuff like that? Is there any restrictions?
It all depends on the definition of park that they have in in these ordinances and stuff. Like in Ontario, part of our battle is about parks inside of developments. Whether it's an apartment building, big apartment complex, or if it's a single family home development and stuff. Well, do you count those parks too as far as creating exclusion zones? And actually, in there the answer is yes.
What about Yosemite area?
I'm sorry?
What about Yosemite area?
I don't know. You don't. The federal government doesn't have residency restrictions. Okay, so it's not the federal government you have to worry about. You have to worry about the county and the city. Okay. I think there was another question. Is there another question about California? Going. Oh.
I'm one still statement from question.
Okay.
So we're just talking about that in Ontario, about apartment complexes that actually build a park inside of it. Now, in my view and in my opinion, it's always been a strategic plan for these complexes or any city to build as many parks and small little parks. It is no bigger than a home, a fully built home, in order to keep those restrictions on. Is that something that's being thought of?
Yeah, we have that problem in the city of Los Angeles where they were calling them pocket parks. In the city of LA, they were building these pocket parks, and I actually went to one of them even before it was constructed, and it was a terrible place. It was actually 4 or 5 different, it wasn't an odd number of streets, so it must have been 5 streets coming together, and there's this little triangle of land, which was like a dump, except that there were needles, like syringe needles in there and stuff like that, and supposedly there were some really terrible accidents there. It was a really dangerous place, right? And they're all building a pocket park here. And when I first went there, I went, holy stuff. As a parent, I would never take my child there. One thing, you get stuck with a needle, you might end up with HIV. The other thing is, this car may slam into you. And it was a teeny tiny little area. But they did clean it up and they created a park there. For the purpose of, it was a local member of that city council who created it so that nobody could live nearby. Oh, no registrants could live nearby. Or their families. Okay, so let's go on to Anoki, please. She's coming here all the way from New York and to talk to us about something that's even more stupid, I think, than California.
It's hard to have a battle about which is stupider, but as Janice said, I'm Anoki. I'm also an attorney, but kind of the opposite of Janice, I do primarily criminal defense work. But we also have a dedicated sex offense registry project in my office. So we represent people who are coming home from prison, trying to get their risk levels determined because we have a tiered registry there. And we also do a lot in terms of residency restrictions now because New York has decided, in New York, just structurally, we have the state law, we don't have all these local ordinances and things, but basically they've decided that our 1,000-foot law, which is a state law saying that no one can be within 1,000 feet of a school, which actually it does not include daycares and pre-K, but grade school essentially, that law is preventing people from leaving prison at this point. So there's lots of people that we have, a lot of our clients have family members, friends, others willing to take them in. Some even have money to get their own apartment, though we do primarily represent people who can't afford attorneys. So, even with all of this, the state has basically decided we are going to indefinitely hold people until there's space available in one of the 4 shelters, or 4 or 5, that don't fall into this category, essentially. So this has created a huge problem in New York State, and our office is taking on, along with a couple of other offices, lawsuits on behalf of people who are stuck in prison past their sentences. So, how is this happening? So we had the Sexual Assault Reform Act, which is Executive Law 259C14. That was enacted in 2000, and then there was an amendment in 2005. So in its original form, it was supposed to just be a residency restriction for people with crimes involving a minor. Then in 2005, they expanded that, so it was also people who are considered high risk. So we have level 1, level 2, level 3 in New York, level 1 being the lowest risk. So anyone who is level 3, whether or not the crime involved a minor, is also subject, which just gives you an idea of how stupid this is, because conceivably it's related to protecting children, but that's not how it actually plays out at all. And we know that doesn't matter anyway, because there's absolutely no relation. So basically, the 1,000-foot law came there. Also, our law only applies for people on parole. It's not for people who are not on parole. But most people are given these sentences. We call it post-release supervision. But usually you get, if you have a determinate sentence, you get like 15 years plus like 15 years of post-release supervision. So people are on parole for a long time. And you're also on parole if you have like an indeterminate sentence, so if you have like 25 to 50 years, but you did well in prison and you got your merit time or your good time, you're still on parole for the remainder of that sentence. So someone who might get out, at 33 years, they still have 17 more years to go. So this residency requirement applies to them regardless.
Is this in New York State or in New York City?
This is in New York State. I practice in New York City primarily, and that's where we're seeing kind of the worst in terms of people staying in prison, just because, how many people have been to New York City here? Lots of people? Okay. Yeah, you can imagine, there's a school on every couple of blocks. It's ridiculous. Like, we have, geomapping program that we use, and there's these red dots, like, all over the city, and there's these small little pockets where people can live. And like Janice said, sometimes those are like airports or, places that no one can actually stay.
Not affordable.
Yeah, not affordable. And, it applies regardless of whether it's private housing or public housing. So, I have many clients with significant disabilities who need to go to a nursing home, and the nursing homes won't take them because they're too close to a school. Or, the private nursing homes won't take them because they've decided they won't accept anyone with a sex offense. So,
Can I ask you a question?
yeah.
So you're saying that even though the sentence is over,
Yeah.
they're still gonna stay in prison?
Yes, exactly. Even though the sentence is
So
over.
they're like a life term, so if they go for 2 years, go down for 2 years, and they can stay for 10 years, 20 years, 20 years?
Well, yeah, luckily we have not seen this play out quite that far yet, but we do have people who've been in like 4 or 5 years after when they were supposed to be released. So it's definitely, it's a huge problem right now.
They get reimbursed.
I was just gonna ask, are
Yeah.
they getting compensated for that time?
No,
In California, you do. If you're over
you mean
one
like
day,
on
you get
parole?
paid.
Yeah.
No, they're getting, like in California,
Mm.
if you're incorrectly incarcerated.
Oh, I see, yeah.
You receive an amount for every single day you're in.
Right, so if we win, like if we
Right.
win and it's actually unconstitutional as we argue it is, then yes, of course, they will be entitled to that kind of, but I think they would still have to do some sort of civil suit to get that. You have a question?
Yeah, do you know approximately how many people are being
So,
compensated?
yeah, so Legal Aid is actually trying to compile data on this right now. I was hoping they would have it in time so I could bring it here, but that's going to come out soon. So there's a case that's currently pending in the Court of Appeals, the highest court in New York State. So that's going to be in an amicus brief, so I can definitely send that around to people once it comes out.
Also, have you been in touch with the attorneys in Illinois? Because we have about 1,500 people stuck in prison.
Oh, wow.
Because,
Okay.
yeah. And they've been this has been going on for at least 10 years.
Right.
But we just recently, passed a law that makes your mandatory supervised release indefinite for people. So
Okay.
we do have people there who have been there, 8, 9
Wow. Okay.
years, and I can connect you with those people if you're.
That'd be great. Yeah, I think we should talk because, this is not just New York specific. This is happening in other states too. And, the scary part is it can happen in any state that really has, laws like this.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just touch on the language of this law because it's so broad. It says where a person serving a sentence for an eligible offense is released on parole or conditionally released. So that means either released, on their post-release supervision or they're still completing their indeterminate sentence. The board shall require, as a mandatory condition of such release, that such sentenced offender shall refrain from knowingly entering into or upon any school grounds. So currently that's been construed as a residency restriction, but you can imagine that language can be used for presence too. It's super broad, and that's what is constantly something we're fearful in our office. What are they going to do next? What's going to be the next expansion of this? So I was hoping to put it up on here, but I will just kind of hold this up. You can sort of see the little map of New York City here. All those red zones are where people cannot live. So you can see Manhattan is like, yeah, sort of pull it up. Manhattan is basically, I mean, you can't find housing in Manhattan. It's ridiculous. You can see Staten Island's a little better, but a lot of that area there is not actually inhabitable. It's just like, used for parks or something else. So basically the realities of complying with this law in New York City, very grim. There's only a handful of shelters for people who don't have homes to return to. Family homes are almost always too near schools, so people can't go home. Certain neighborhoods are just entirely impossible. And it would be nice if at least parole would tell you. I have many clients who have families who are willing to actually purchase a space in New York City or somewhere nearby. They're willing to actually buy their family member an apartment, willing to even move with them, help take care of them and stuff. And parole won't tell them if the spots that they want to move to are actually within these zones or not. They have the software, it's literally like a Google check. I think it takes 3 minutes for them to plug the address in, but they won't do it. They want you to have a lease, they want you to be established, so they're making it completely impossible even for people who are trying to comply with this law.
So this is clearly a violation of human rights.
Yes.
I mean, this is beyond the United States. This should be at the level of the United Nations saying, what the hell are you guys doing?
Yeah, I agree with you. This is completely ridiculous.
I used to live in French Guiana. That's where the French prison colonies were.
Yeah.
They had a system called doublage. This sounds worse.
Yeah.
Doublage was if you're sentenced for 5 years, you do your sentence, and then you spend another 5 years in French Guiana.
Right.
Which was not good. It was not
to
good.
stay there.
Actually outside the prison, which is sometimes worse than being in the prison.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
this sounds like
Imagine a lot of these people are in prison for decades and they've completed their sentences, they've done everything they're supposed to do, they did the whole sex offender treatment program, did all the other required programming, and then they're being told, you can't go home, and they're like, I have a home to return to. They're like, well, you can't go there, and you can't go anywhere else. So it's really, it's a horrible situation, and I've many times. Yeah, they have, their hope is the lawsuits, which, I wish we had a better outlook for. It's just that we are currently practicing in so many counties, and, these are areas, we're New York City people, so we're unfamiliar with, Albany County, but that's where we're filing these lawsuits, so just kind of have to see what happens.
I was just thinking for a moment how this possibly interacts with the general issue of homelessness in this way. If you go to New York City, for anybody who lives in the Bay Area and goes to San Francisco and sees homeless people, it's become a huge political issue.
Right.
All the homeless people in the streets. You don't see them in New York City. There are very few in comparison. And an article that I read explained that the reason was that about 10 years ago there was a court decision that said the government had the responsibility to provide housing.
Right.
And so New York City has this enormous public housing program that dwarfs every place. It eats a lot of the budget providing housing to all these otherwise homeless people. Well, if that principle is generally true, why doesn't it apply to your clients?
Exactly.
That it seems to me it's...
Well, that's an argument we make. DHS has this huge budget. Why can't they just buy up more shelters? Why can't they just buy up new places for people?
It would seem under that
they
precedent.
are. Absolutely. So that's why we've been mostly doing this by filing these Article 78 petitions. So basically that's like a writ of mandamus, and we're saying that Department of Corrections, parole, they're not complying with the law. They should be, doing more to assist people in securing housing. So that's what we've been doing with some success. So I just kind of wanted to go through what our arguments generally are, what this is, because it's not, as you said, it's not just New York State. This is happening all over, and these are arguments that we can all potentially use. So New York State, this might be specific to New York State, but the way they're doing this is that we have a law in the books called the RTF law, Residential Treatment Facilities. So Penal Law 7045 says that the Board of Parole can impose as a condition of post-release supervision for a period of not exceeding 6 months, that they don't follow that, but that's on the books, or something immediately following release, that the person be transferred to and participate in the programs of an RTF. So you'd ask, what is an RTF? An RTF is supposed to be a community-based residence in or near a community where employment, educational, and training opportunities are readily available for people who intend to reside in or near that community when released. So it's supposed to be, something more akin to a halfway house. That's what the law. Yeah, but it's not. It's literally just prison. So we have like, our incarcerated person look up in New York State, you can type in a person's name. All that happens is that their status gets changed from in custody to in residential treatment. They stay in general population a lot of the time, so they're not even moved to another place. They're still, under lock and key 24 hours a day, wearing prison uniforms, going to the mess hall, unable to access anything at all. And parole says, no, it's different because we give them more opportunities to meet with their parole officer. In reality, those meetings, they go, do you have a place to live? And the person's like, no, I have no resources to find a place to live. I'm incarcerated. I don't have the internet. I don't have anything. I have limited access to the phone. And they're like, okay, see you in 2 weeks. that's the substance of these conversations. And this happens, regardless of whether people have completed their sentences, which is just insane to me. Good time is technically discretionary on the prison, and it's bad enough for people who have these lengthy indeterminate terms, but for people who have actually stayed past where they reached their good time and have reached, when they were absolutely told from when they go in prison they're gonna be released, and then to just stay there indefinitely, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's so bad. So what do we do? We're doing these lawsuits, that's the first thing. So, we're filing proceedings. We started only with people who have reached that maximum date, but now we're also doing it for people with indeterminate sentences. In some circumstances, of course, everything is limited resources, and we just don't have as many arguments for people who are on the indeterminate sentences because they're not even placed in an RTF. They're just like RTF, but they're literally just like, they just extend their prison time. So we're trying to be creative, come up with some arguments there. Another option is the interstate compact. So we do encourage people who have, who have connections in other states to try to get parole there. Even Florida, which is crazy to me. But sometimes people have a better chance of getting paroled out somewhere else, than they do in New York City. So I had, one client who was serving an indeterminate sentence, 25 to 50 years, did his 33, was still in. They said, we will keep you for 17 more. And they also, they put people on lists, for the shelters. They have this insane waiting list, but there's a lot of secrecy about who's on the list. They told them basically, you're low priority because we have the authority to keep you here for another 17 years. So presumably he would have gone near the end of that list, but he had family in North Carolina, so we talked about it a lot. One of the downsides was that he had to wear an ankle bracelet if he went down to North Carolina because they have the satellite monitoring. But he ultimately said, I'd rather wear an ankle bracelet and be out of prison. So, he decided to do that, and I am happy to say he's at home with his family, he's with his mom and his sister. And he likes it down there. He says it's really not bad in the county that he's in. Parole officers are relatively nice as far as that can go, and so he's doing okay. So there's some hope for people who can get interstate parole. We also try what we can to help our clients find housing, encourage family members to find housing. I've been trying to fight with parole about, can you just verify if this address is okay before people move there? That would be such a good preliminary step. So I put that in my lawsuits too. I think, if anyone is not going to agree with us that this law is unconstitutional, at the very least, just compel parole to do this minimal step of seeing if this place is okay. So, all my stuff is pending, so I don't know how that argument went, but I will let you know. Another thing we do is we just try to adjudicate people when they get out of prison so they won't be a level 3. If they don't have an offense involving a minor, we try to get them out of this restriction, Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, have you researched as to whether or not you guys can get the same, I'm imagining it's an app, but the same app that the parole or probation uses?
Right.
So that you guys have it and say, hey, we have the same app or whatever, just so that you guys can have the security of who you're defending.
So we don't have the same app. They won't share their app with us, but we've kind of created our own. So we had someone in the office who knew someone who was good with computers, so they created their own geospatial mapping. So we can tell, not with absolute certainty, but we can at least give people an idea, this might be a good neighborhood. We also, ironically use where people live, and you can look them up on the registry. You can actually figure out, oh, this area is actually, this is okay, people live here. So I can say, there's other people here. If we know certain apartments that are particularly friendly to people with offenses, we tell people about that. So that's sort of all we can do right now because we're not really a housing organization, but to the extent we can, we try to help out.
I have a question regarding residency. So if a hypothetical, if I live in California and I'm in an area doesn't have residency restrictions and I decide I'm gonna move to Brooklyn, am I gonna go to jail? If I can't live, because these people are held because they can't find a place to live. If I go there and can't find a place to live,
so you wouldn't even be able
subjected to those?
Yeah, I mean, you would have to be subjected to that if you moved, but you wouldn't even be able to move there. Like, you would have to get approval from New York State before you were able to move there. So they wouldn't even let you move in if you didn't have a place that complied with this residency. And if they found out you were living there, you know, there are these strict penalties. Yeah, it's an e-felony in New York if you're violating. Yeah.
Well, in California, it would be a failure to register.
Right.
The fact is, it wouldn't allow you to register, but it would be a failure for you to register.
Right.
You
And that's how they keep you.
You'd just be told to leave.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, now he has me curious, because in Illinois, you can go register and just say, I'm homeless. I'm transient. So you're allowed to, could he go?
I'm not going to.
They have to
I'm
say,
not.
like, a shelter. I don't think so. Like, I think
You
here
can't
you're
just say,
allowed to
I'm homeless.
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't think you can, at least especially if you're in prison. I'm not sure how it works for people out because we don't really deal with that as much, but if you're in prison, they won't let you just say you're homeless. You have to say, I'm going to X shelter, I'm going, somewhere.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about somebody moving. What I'm a little confused by is I thought the law only applies to people who are under parole or supervision by New York State.
I think if you moved into New York State, though, you would have to be under, like, dual supervision. That's my understanding.
Transfer supervision from your home state.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do they do, how do they treat people who are in federal supervised release?
I'm not sure about that, actually. I know we do have some people who are both on state and federal, but I think whatever state that you live in, you have to abide by those residency restrictions.
Yeah, but if you're no state,
yeah.
Because if you're in federal supervised release, there is no state.
Right. I think it's your crime of conviction, though. I think, like, your state of conviction, where it happened, even if it's a federal case.
Where you committed it it's a federal offense, there's no state offense.
Okay.
Which is the case, for example, with 1/3 of everybody with a CP offense.
Right.
It's a federal offense.
No, I understand that. I think that because there is no federal, like, residency restriction, I think where you live afterward, it's the state that you're in, though, that you have to.
But you said it only applies to people on state parole.
Yeah, people on parole. I think if you're on federal parole, I'm not 100% sure about this, and I can definitely look into it, but we only have people on dual supervision, I believe, so I'm not sure exactly how
It would
it
be an
works.
interesting difference in treatment.
Yeah.
Based on nothing that makes any sense.
Right. It would be interesting. It would definitely be interesting.
I have a question. How much does it cost to house these people for the extra years? And wouldn't somebody in a headline somewhere, people be appalled if they read this? I mean,
Yes, it's a lot of money. Yeah, I think that the monetary angle really should be something that we push. I forget the exact statistic, but it costs some insane amount of money to keep people incarcerated every day. It's like,
for somebody being 4 or 5 years past their day of
exactly.
release.
Especially when they have family, to go back to. It's.
I know that there's been recent headlines here in California that basically talk about the cost of incarceration, and actually around Sacramento, I think it's meant for the eyes of our state legislators, and it says this is the cost of sending a kid to college every year, and this is the cost to incarcerate them.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely brilliant.
Right, that's a great way to, yeah.
I think you need to get on 60 Minutes.
Yeah, and do these, yeah. I mean, definitely, the more attention we can get to this, the better.
Like in the media, like big time.
Yeah.
I think, Paul, I had never heard of something like that. I thought when you're baking,
You're done.
Right.
even if you're homeless, you're done.
Right. Nope. So, yeah, the basic arguments that we've been raising in this respect, we have a bunch of statutory arguments based on the RTF law. So we say they're not in RTF, they're in prison. That's our main argument. This is not in any respect in or near a community for people. It's usually hours away from their support system. It's in no way a community-based residence. It's prison. It's not, they're not getting resources for housing, employment, anything. There's no extra programs geared towards rehabilitation, anything like that. The Department of Corrections always comes back with something that they're doing, like some, crazy program that they've made up that's like 1 week long, but it's nothing. So we do that. We say they were never actually released, so the RTF conditions should not have been triggered. They never actually were released from prison, just kept them there. I've been arguing lately for my clients who have disabilities that exemption from the residence restrictions is required under the ADA. So I've been trying to argue that, because they cannot accommodate people, none of the shelters in New York that are compliant with these residency restrictions can take someone who needs assistance with daily living. So nursing homes are like their only choice, and we don't really have any currently unless you find a private nursing home that's willing to take someone. So, that's been the argument that's currently pending, so I'll let you know how that one goes too. We did have a good decision come out in 2017. So New York State also, like, the Court of Appeals is our highest court, which always sounds weird to me for North Carolina, and Supreme Court is like the high court. But Supreme Court is our lowest court, and then there's the appellate division, and then there is the Court of Appeals. So in the appellate division, so the intermediate court, there was Gonzalez versus Annucci, which came out in 2017. And that basically said that the Department of Corrections was providing insufficient assistance in helping people secure housing. So that case had some really good language. Like Janice, I really like the quotes from this. So there's a correction law 2015, which imposes an obligation on the Department of Corrections to assist people in community supervision in securing housing. So the court said, during the period of petitioner's stay at RTF, DOCS thus had a legal duty to assist him in finding appropriate housing. DOCS is Department of Corrections. Then they said virtually the only assistance offered a petitioner involved waiting for him, then confined in an RTF located within the walls of a medium security prison, without access to the internet, without the ability to leave the facility to visit libraries, housing offices, or potential residences, and with strictly limited access to telephone and correspondence privileges to identify potential residences and then investigate his proposals. So they really got the argument that we were making. This is one of the cases that started in our office, and now we have a person who's a former employee. She's taking this up to the Court of Appeals because, of course, they appealed this. We also cross-appealed because we lost on something else. So that's probably going to be decided later this year, but at least in the meantime, we have some support, some case support, that the Department of Corrections has to do more than just ask people, have you found a place, when they give them zero resources to do so. So people are making some creative arguments that they should at least, get the chance to go out in the community like every now and then. Of course, that only works if you're housed in a facility near the community you want to go to. But it's really a mess right now. Mr. Gonzalez, interestingly enough, actually found 58 residences, despite the fact that he had no resources to do so. I have no idea how he did that. I think, letters, I don't know. He found 58 residences, but the Department of Corrections rejected all of them. All 58.
So this is maybe a silly comment, all right, and I apologize for this, but isn't this, you're keeping them the longer in jail for no real reason?
Right.
Isn't this slavery?
Yeah, I mean, it's unconstitutional. That's definitely what we argue, that, they're keeping them in without any justification at all. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry, I thought I saw a hand. So basically, we've made several challenges, arguing that this is completely unconstitutional. The first that we make is that an equal protection challenge, that this is wealth-based discrimination. For people who don't have the resources to get any housing for themselves, this is literally just rendering them homeless, whereas if you have a family member who is able to, take you to one of the private residences that's not on the map, then you're out. And this is absolutely, we argue this is absolutely wealth-based discrimination. We also have several due process arguments, the 14th Amendment. Just like Janice, we're arguing there's no correlation between these residency restrictions and protecting children, public safety. There's absolutely no reason. We cite all of those wonderful studies, that say that the recidivism rate is actually much low, not frightening and high, much lower for people with sex offenses, and that, residency restrictions don't protect anyone because most of these are committed by someone it's not stranger danger. So we try to educate the court as best we can about it. We also do argue freedom of association arguments, right to travel. So we say that these laws are also like a presence-based restriction. Conceivably, you can't go to a treatment program that you might be assigned to. You can't even go to your parole office because it's too near school. This language is just incredibly broad. We also argue that it's an illegal ex post facto law. So, Sarah came about, this residency restriction law came about in 2000, revised in 2005. The majority of my clients were convicted far before that. So we argue, of course, the challenge, as we heard earlier from Catherine Carpenter, is that, convincing the courts that this is a punishment and not just a civil penalty, which, I think should be a no-brainer, but they don't think so. So it's been a little split on that. The 8th Amendment came up yesterday. That's definitely something that, again, has the same concern. If it's not a punishment, we can't really attack it under the 8th Amendment. But it is something that I think my office has brought up before and might bring up again, depending on the situation. So, other than that, let me see. see. Now what's happening? Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. All right, so now what's happening in New York? There has been a lot of opposition to the residency restrictions, which is encouraging. There has been some, some organizing around it. Emily Horowitz and Bill Dobbs started a sex offense working group, and we've had people on the registry come and, we kind of brainstorm about ways to deal with this. We do have my office as well as 2 other appellate offices in New York City are taking on these cases more and more, doing these Article 78 habeas litigations for, people who are held in prison for a really long period of time. But in February, there actually was an attempted bill by Governor Cuomo. He tried to expand our residency law. So not only would it be, which is already so expensive, but not only would it be applied to level 3 people, but also level 2. So he wanted to do everyone except for the very lowest level. And I mean, it's also still inclusive of anyone with a crime involving a minor. So that would just expand it to pretty much everyone, honestly. And they also wanted to expand the definition of school grounds to include daycares and pre-K facilities. So they really wanted to expand this. That's crazy in New York because there's so many people in apartment complexes that have at-home daycares, so it really would have obliterated the rest of the map. And they also wanted to ban anyone from living in a temporary shelter that housed families. So that takes out the rest of the shelter as well. It would have actually just completely taken away. Luckily that bill did not pass, but this is the fear. The language is so broad that conceivably these types of bills can keep on coming up. So we try to quash them as much as we can, but only so much.
What happened to that proposal?
I think it just didn't get passed. Yeah, it was something that was in the works, and then the 30 days passed, and it didn't go in. So yeah.
It has nothing to do with the fact that he's running for re-election.
Of course, of course not. Yeah, I'm sure it did, but
Isn't New York incredibly blue?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the city is, but New York State not so much. You go up anywhere upstate, and you will see, Trump signs popping up everywhere, and it's
I want to make a comment about that. Folks, even though I have registered for a lifetime with one party, the fact is that party, Democrats, can't be trusted to be our friends either. So it doesn't make any difference what we find out, no matter what level of government is, whether they're Republican or Democrat, it doesn't make any difference. And we have friends in both parties and we have enemies in both parties.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
With that comment, has there been, for my curiosity, have either of the 2 parties been more favorable?
No.
Or no?
No. Really.
It really is not a party issue.
It's not it's up to this point in time, at least in California, it's not been a party issue.
They're bipartisan on this.
Yeah.
We have more luck with Democrats than Republicans, I think. We
Well,
don't, it's not, the Democrats are not reliable
a lot of
allies.
libertarians actually.
Yeah.
But the Republicans are reliable opponents.
Well, they're reliable the problem we have in our state capital is this: we have these people, they call themselves law and order Democrats, but when it comes to quote public safety issues, they vote like Republicans.
I just want to agree that I think in reforming the laws, there may be a slight edge with Democrats, but in the creation of the laws, Democrats have been at least as instrumental. Because the Democrats passed these terrible laws out to their vulnerable legislators like Candy, so that they'll, you won't know this, but, so that they'll have direct mail ads to run. Just nobody should give the Democrats any credit on this at all.
Unfortunately not. So folks, we have run out of time on this panel, and I'm very sensitive to time, as I've told you, and I don't want to